Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere so cold your eyelashes might turn into tiny icicles before you've even finished saying Antarctica. You're standing on the edge of the world, a land that's been locked away under miles of ice for millions of years. The air bites at your cheeks, the snow under your boots squeaks with each step, and the horizon is nothing but white on white. Out here, it's so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat. And just to keep things fun, you probably wouldn't last long without a very thick coat, a few layers of thermal gear, and, oh, maybe a heated igloo. No big deal. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk forward, the wind sharp but steady, curling around you like an invisible scarf. Beneath your feet, the ice feels ancient, not just old, but primordial, as if it remembers a time before humans had even thought of sailing the seas. In this place, history isn't written in books. It's buried deep in frozen layers, sealed like time capsules. Somewhere far below your boots lies a continent bigger than Europe, a place of mountains, valleys, and rivers long hidden from human eyes. Scientists agree that Antarctica has been covered in ice for millions of years, yet strange whispers in history say otherwise. And that's where the curiosity kicks in. How do some maps from centuries ago seem to show its coastline without ice? Either someone got really lucky with their artistic guesses, or we're missing a huge chapter of human exploration. A gust of wind sends a shiver down your spine, and you glance toward the pale horizon. The sun is low, painting the snow in pink and gold. Out here, you can almost believe that the land beneath is dreaming of a time when it was green, alive, and warm. A quirky thought slips in. Maybe penguins once had beachfront properties. No HOA fees, just free krill. Historians still argue whether such visions are pure fantasy or echoes of forgotten truth. Some say the ice has been here far too long for any human eyes to have seen what's beneath. Others, more willing to stretch the edges of possibility, hint at civilizations capable of navigating the globe long before our textbooks say they could. You take another step, the sound swallowed instantly by the snow. In this vast stillness, even the smallest mystery feels enormous. Somewhere ahead, hidden behind a wall of time and frost, lies the first clue, an old piece of parchment that might just rewrite what we think we know about the world. The snow gives way to stone beneath your boots, not the jagged raw rock of the Antarctic wilderness, but smooth tiles beneath a vaulted ceiling. You blink, and the blinding white of the polar plateau is gone. In its place stands a quiet study in Constantinople, the year 1513, where the air smells faintly of ink, old parchment, and the lingering spice of trade ships docked in the Golden Horn. Spread across a large oak table is the thing that draws you in, a map unlike anything you've seen before. The colors are rich, painted with a confident hand. Every curve of coastline seems certain, not tentative. And there, among the known and the speculative, lies a detail that doesn't belong. A stretch of land at the bottom of the world, shaped remarkably like the coast of Antarctica, but without its icy shroud. The man who drew this, Admiral Piri Reis, was no ordinary map maker. A skilled Ottoman navigator, he pieced this chart together from fragments of older maps, some said to be ancient even in his time. Mainstream historians agree that the Piri Reis Map is real and dated to 1513, but it's the sources he used, rumored charts from long-forgotten civilizations, that give it its peculiar edge. You trace your fingers along the southern coastline. The detail is unsettling. Not jagged ice, but flowing contours, inlets, and bays that seem more like a temperate shore than a frozen wasteland. You imagine trying to explain this to a 16th century sailor. Yes, it's real, but you'll need a lot more socks than you think. Here's the quirky part. One fringe interpretation suggests that Piri Reis's sources came from a civilization with aerial mapping abilities, an idea that sounds suspiciously like ancient drone footage, minus the drones. Historians still argue whether this accuracy is coincidence, artistic invention, or evidence of a knowledge chain stretching far deeper into the past than we dare admit. The candlelight flickers, and your shadow falls across the map, briefly eclipsing a cluster of cryptic notes in the margins. Piri Reis himself wrote that some of his information came from maps made in the days of Alexander the Great. It's a claim that feels almost theatrical, the kind of thing you'd hear in a tavern just before someone tries to sell you a genuine piece of Noah's Ark. Yet, here it is, inked in his own handwriting. You lean closer. The coastline curves downward, the ink fading slightly, but the shape remains undeniable. Could it be that, at some point in human history, this land was known and seen, not as an icy void, but as a living, habitable place? The question lingers in the dimly lit air. Outside the study window, the city of Constantinople hums softly in the night. Merchants bargain in the streets, a muezzin's call floats faintly over the rooftops, and the Bosphorus glitters under the moon. Yet your mind stays anchored to this table, this map, this impossible detail that seems to defy the age in which it was drawn. You can almost hear the scratching of the quill as Piri Reis bends over his work, never knowing that centuries later, his map would become a magnet for conspiracy theories, scholarly debates, and the occasional YouTube rabbit hole. Somewhere, tucked between the lines of known history and the shadows of speculation, the mystery deepens. Your hands rest on the edge of the table, eyes tracing the strange southern shore again and again. The parchment feels rough, uneven, as though it's carrying the fingerprints of every mapmaker who ever touched it before Piri Reis stitched their work into his own. You imagine him poring over scraps, some torn from charts drawn by Arab sailors, others copied from the guarded archives of medieval Europe, and perhaps even older fragments no one can trace. In the dim light, you start to notice something peculiar: the precision of certain coastlines. Not just their general shape, but their proportional distances, angles, and bays. It's the kind of accuracy you'd expect from modern surveying, not from men navigating with little more than a compass, a sextant, and the occasional good guess. Mainstream historians point out a simple truth. Cartographers of the Age of Discovery were often skilled at extrapolating missing details. They could take known coasts, extend them based on trade routes, and smooth over the gaps with a confident flourish. Yet, here's the oddity. The Piri Reis Map doesn't just hint at Antarctica's shape, it appears to show it without ice, suggesting a warmer era millions of years past. And unless someone invented time travel in the 15th century and forgot to tweet about it, that shouldn't be possible. One quirky theory claims that ancient mariners might have navigated using an early form of dead reckoning, combined with stellar alignments, letting them map with surprising accuracy over long distances. Of course, that's assuming they weren't just drawing sea monsters for fun in the margins and accidentally getting a continent right. Historians still argue whether this was skill, chance, or something else entirely. You shift in your seat, feeling the weight of the idea pressing in. If multiple sources fed into this map, then somewhere in history, maybe far back, beyond the reach of surviving records, there were people who knew more about the world than we give them credit for. People who sailed far enough, or learned from those who did, to sketch coastlines that would remain hidden under ice until modern radar confirmed them centuries later. The study fades, and the scene around you shifts. You're on the deck of a wooden ship, the lateen sails taut in a steady wind. The sea is endless, the stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. A navigator leans over a chart, muttering measurements, his eyes flicking between the heavens and the ink. There is no GPS, no engine, no guarantee of safety, just skill, instinct, and the occasional prayer. Back in the present, your gaze returns to the map in front of you. The southern continent stares back, both silent and smug, as if daring you to solve its riddle. The shapes are there, the precision is there, and the implications, well, they're enough to make you wonder what else in our history is hiding in plain sight. The map fades from sight, and you find yourself standing in a dusty archive, somewhere between myth and memory. The air smells of parchment and candle smoke, and around you, shelves groan under the weight of scrolls and codices whose languages you can't even name. You run a hand along a cracked leather spine, feeling the ridges of symbols pressed into it centuries ago. Somewhere here, in these stacks, lie whispers of civilizations that may have known Antarctica long before our so-called Age of Discovery. You pull out a rolled manuscript and unfasten its cord. The ink is faded, the script uneven, as if copied from a much older source. It tells of lands far to the south where the seas grew sluggish and the sun stayed low. Lands rich with mountains and rivers, not the ice-locked desert we know today. Mainstream historians will tell you no culture had both the means and the motive to sail so far south in the deep past. Still, legends scattered from Polynesia to South America hint otherwise. One quirky tidbit comes from an obscure 18th century scholar who claimed that the ancient Phoenicians, masters of Mediterranean trade, might have ventured far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, possibly even reaching the edges of an ice-free Antarctic coastline. He based this on nothing more than a few peculiar trade records and, frankly, a suspicious love of dramatic conclusions. Historians still argue whether such long-range voyages were daring feats of exploration or just wishful thinking wrapped in a romantic flourish. As you read, the parchment ripples in your hands, and suddenly you're hearing voices, not the muffled shuffle of librarians, but the murmur of a long-forgotten harbor. Ships with high, sweeping prows rock gently against the dock. Their sails are patched but sturdy, painted with strange emblems, suns with too many rays, birds with outstretched wings. The sailors speak in a tongue you don't understand, yet their gestures tell the story clearly. Tales of storms survived, islands discovered, and waters where icebergs gleam like floating temples. You step onto one of their decks, feeling the rough planks beneath your feet. The horizon stretches away, a blend of sea mist and possibility. In this moment, you can almost believe that somewhere in their logbooks, maybe written in symbols now lost to us, lies the memory of a voyage so far south it brushed the edge of a different world. The vision fades, and you're back in the archive, staring down at the fragile manuscript. The inked coastlines dance faintly in the candlelight, as if trying to tell you their story before they crumble into dust. Somewhere between fact and fable, these echoes of lost civilizations keep tugging at your thoughts, daring you to imagine what the ice has been hiding all along. The walls of the archive dissolve into a soft, humid breeze, and you find yourself standing on the edge of a vast shoreline. Not Antarctica as you know it, but something transformed. The air is warm, smelling faintly of salt and flowering plants you can't name. Before you stretches a land of rolling green hills, rivers glinting under the sun, and wide sandy beaches where the waves lap lazily against the shore. You walk forward, the sand warm beneath your feet. Above you, seabirds wheel in the sky, their cries sharp and bright. Somewhere inland, a waterfall spills over dark stone cliffs into a wide pool, sending up a fine mist that catches the sunlight in tiny rainbows. This is Antarctica, as it might have been, before the ice took it, before glaciers carved it into the silent frozen expanse we know today. Mainstream science confirms that, millions of years ago, Antarctica was indeed warmer and supported forests, lakes, and a rich variety of life. Fossilized tree stumps and plant remains have been found beneath the ice, proof of a greener past. The quirky twist? Some fringe writers claim that such warmth persisted into the human era, suggesting that ancient mariners could have explored and mapped this lush southern continent. Historians still argue whether that's plausible, given what we know about the planet's climatic history. You wander inland, and the terrain changes subtly. Low shrubs give way to groves of tall, strange trees, their leaves shaped like fans, swaying gently in the wind. The air hums with insect life, and somewhere in the distance you hear the trumpeting call of an animal you can't quite picture. The sun feels different here, lower in the sky, casting a golden warmth that sinks into your skin. A thought drifts through your mind. If you were an ancient sailor who stumbled upon this place, wouldn't you have told the world about it? Or maybe, just maybe, you'd have kept it to yourself, a secret harbor at the edge of the map, untouched by rivals. And perhaps in time, that secret would fade into rumor, and the rumor into myth. The scene ripples and fades like heat haze, and once more, you're left with the stark reality of the modern Antarctic, a place of biting wind, endless ice, and silence so deep it swallows your breath. But in your mind's eye, you can still see the rivers winding through green valleys, still hear the warm surf against the sand. You can't help but wonder if the coastlines on those old maps were drawn from memory, not imagination. The warm vision dissolves, replaced by the groan of timber and the creak of rope. You stand on the deck of a broad sea-worn vessel, its hull patched with planks from half a dozen kinds of wood. Salt spray stings your cheeks, and the air smells of tar, fish, and the faint sweetness of fermented fruit, the currency of long voyages. Around you, a crew of weathered faces moves with the practiced rhythm of men who've lived more days at sea than on land. They are the forgotten voyagers, the ones who may have carried the world's secrets across its waters long before any modern chartmaker drew them. Their sails are heavy linen, their masts lashed tight with ropes thick as your wrist. The ship lists gently in the swell, its prow carved into the shape of a bird with wings flared, a silent guardian pointing the way south. Mainstream historians agree that by the time of the Great Polynesian migrations, humans had mastered open ocean navigation over immense distances. Using nothing but the stars, the shape of waves, and the flight paths of seabirds, these navigators found islands scattered like jewels across the Pacific. The quirky part? Some fringe accounts claim these skills weren't limited to warm tropical waters, that daring crews may have ventured deep into colder, stormier seas, possibly touching lands we assume they never reached. Historians still argue whether such voyages are evidence of extraordinary seamanship or simply the exaggerations of later storytellers. The ship pitches and you grip the railing. Ahead, the horizon is dark and heavy, clouds piling like mountains in the sky. The captain squints into the distance, mutters a command, and the crew moves in a coordinated flurry, reefing sails, tightening lines, bracing for whatever the ocean is about to throw at them. There's a sense that this is not just another stretch of sea. This is a threshold. As the wind rises, you catch snippets of talk among the crew, mentions of lands where the days grow long and the nights never end, where the sea churns with ice, and yet the shorelines hold harbors without frost. Their voices carry both awe and unease, as if they're not sure whether they're chasing a promise or tempting fate. The ship leans into the wind, and spray leaps up to soak your coat. You glance at the bird-shaped prow, its gaze unblinking, its wings forever outstretched toward the unknown. Somewhere ahead, if the tales are true, lies a coastline that shouldn't exist in this age of ice. And if these men reach it, their story might vanish into the waves just as quickly as it appeared. Spray dries to a crust of salt on your sleeves as the storm slackens, and with the sea calmer, your thoughts turn from surviving the waves to understanding the people who read them. You lean against the railing, watching the horizon iron itself flat, and you wonder whether the hands guiding this ship rely on luck or on something quieter and far more precise, a grammar of stars, numbers, shadows, and time that turns a blank ocean into a page full of sentences. You angle your head up. The sky opens like a planetarium without walls. Constellations prick the twilight, not as stories of heroes and beasts, but as coordinates written in light. You follow the steady crawl of Polaris in the far north, then let your gaze dip toward unfamiliar stellar patterns lower in the sky, the kind that promise southern latitudes. The navigator stands near the foremast, measuring with a simple device, a length of cord knotted at intervals, a sighting stick, a memory trained by repetition. He doesn't announce results. He nods to himself and adjusts the course by a breath. You imagine him counting heartbeats to time the swing of the ship as if his rib cage were a pendulum. It's not flashy, but then again, neither is a seatbelt, until the moment you need it. A mainstream fact hums beneath the scene. Long before telescopes, scholars like Eratosthenes measured Earth's circumference using shadows and distance, demonstrating a level of geometric insight that still earns modern respect. That kind of thinking, angles from the sun, lengths on the ground, ratios in your head, is the soil in which good navigation grows. If you can weigh the planet with a stick and a well, you can certainly coax a bearing from stars and a horizon. Of course, whether you can also keep your lunch down during heavy swells is another branch of science entirely. You picture a chain of teachers stretching across centuries, Phoenician pilots memorizing star paths, Arab astronomers refining trigonometry, Indian mathematicians tuning sign tables, Mediterranean sailors tallying leagues on a log line. None of them needs a miracle. They need practice, clear nights, and the humility to correct yesterday's mistake without turning it into a legend about sea serpents. You smirk at the thought that user error may be older than writing itself. Somewhere, a clay tablet probably says, "If map wrong, blame cousin." And yet a fringe curiosity drifts across your deck like fog, the suggestion that someone, somewhere, possessed instruments or tables too advanced for their age. Whisper-thin copper astrolabes older than records admit, or nautical almanacs copied from a library that burned before its borrowers returned the books. A storyteller might point to the Antikythera mechanism and say, "See, the past hid precision behind bronze gears." You don't have to buy the whole antique supercomputer at sea narrative to admit the allure. Historians still argue whether scattered marvels represent a general tradition or isolated sparks that flared and faded without lighting the global stage. You follow the navigator down to a chest that smells of pitch and citrus. He opens it to reveal tools of quiet ambition: a crude cross-staff, a chipped quadrant, a sand glass, a cord with knots spaced to mark the ship's speed, a roll of parchment that looks like someone tried to draw a coastline while the deck tap-danced beneath them. He spreads the parchment, and the boat becomes a classroom. He taps a notch, mutters a latitude, then shows how to step off a day's progress like beads on a rosary. Careful, consistent, almost reverent. The method is imperfect, but so is bread that rises unevenly. You still eat it, preferably with butter. A lull lays over the water. You imagine how, night after night, a skilled crew could stitch small certainties into a wide, resilient net. Angle of a star at culmination, length of noon shadow on a stick, rhythm of swells telegraphed from distant storms, the way birds peel away from land after sunrise and beeline home before dusk. None of these, alone, gives you a map. Together, they give you a story, and stories are what humans follow when the world turns into guesswork. You step to the prow and squint toward a line of low cloud. Your mind overlays geometry on the air, great circles arcing across a sphere you can't see, meridians like harp strings stretched pole to pole. You picture a navigator counting with his fingers as if the ocean were an abacus, adjusting a course by fractions you could write on a thumbnail. It's not that ancient science guarantees perfection, it's that it pushes chance into smaller corners. Even luck gets tired when mathematics keeps taking its seat. Down in the hold, barrels thud softly against their braces. You think about food and how every calculation at sea also budgets for hunger, thirst, and patience. The best course in the world fails if the crew mutinies over the last orange. Practicality becomes its own form of wisdom. Dead reckoning checked by celestial fixes, a noon sight corrected by the log line, a guess wrapped in 3 different kinds of caution, each ready to catch the others. You grin at the thought that redundancy is simply paranoia with better branding. A murmured rumor reaches your ears. An older sailor claims a cousin once saw a sunstone that could find the sun through clouds, a crystal held to the sky until light split just so. It's a quirky tidbit that sails in and out of port with the tides of speculation. Maybe such stones existed. Maybe they were just a way to make cloudy days feel less personal. Either way, the idea makes the crew look upward with fresh intent, and sometimes that's half the work. The deck tilts with a swell, then settles. You watch the navigator check his sand glass, tap the rim, and nod. He trusts his routine more than any single omen. But the question refuses to dock. If methods like these can carry a ship across blue emptiness to known islands, could they also have traced the contours of distant, colder shores with surprising fidelity? Historians still argue whether careful accumulation of small truths can explain uncanny accuracy along coasts no one should have known well, or whether a few lucky guesses, later polished by copyists, masquerade as foresight. Night gathers. The first stars brighten, then multiply. You sense how a sailor's confidence might harden into lore. Follow that bright point to the angle of your thumb. Hold your course until the moon looks like a clipped coin. Correct when the swell swings from your shoulder. Instructions like recipes handed down, tested in weather, seasoned with caution. A cookbook for crossing the world. The wind freshens. The captain gestures, and the crew adjusts the trim with the ease of men who don't debate sail theory while the boom swings. You chuckle at how philosophy always loses to physics when the rope bites your palm. Still, philosophy trails after, asking whether the union of geometry and grit could make a coastline rise from hypothesis to ink. Perhaps the neatest explanation is also the least dramatic. Diligent people, gifted with patience and pattern sense, mapped farther and better than we assume. Or perhaps a few charts copied a few accidents so convincingly that we mistake a coincidence for a chorus. You stand there between possibilities, one foot in arithmetic and the other in appetite for wonder, letting both argue in your chest like friendly neighbors over a fence. The ship holds steady on her course, not toward certainty, but toward the next measurement, the next quiet subtraction that nudges chance aside. You breathe with the swell and accept that on a moving deck, proof rarely stands still long enough to be weighed. But method does, and method, like a well-tied knot, keeps you from drifting where you didn't mean to go. The deck hums under your boots as the wind steadies, and your thoughts tilt from ropes and star charts to something grander and stranger, the stage beneath the oceans themselves. You stare past the bow, and the world feels like a slow machine, its gears turning too gradually for human eyes, yet turning all the same. If the ship is your instrument, Earth is the drum it plays, and for a heartbeat, you wonder whether the beat has ever changed. You picture the planet from far above, a blue sphere swirled with white, its crust divided into wide rafts of stone that raft slowly over a molten interior. A sober, mainstream fact steps in. Plate tectonics describes how continents drift over millions of years, colliding, rifting, climbing into mountain ranges, and sliding beneath one another in subduction zones. This isn't rumor or romance, it's textbook geology backed by seafloor magnetism, earthquake patterns, and satellite measurements that catch continents creeping along at the speed of fingernails growing. Not thrilling in a chase scene, sure, but devastatingly persuasive over deep time. You lean on the rail and let the idea bloom. If continents wander, climates wander with them. Shift a landmass toward the pole and it chills, push it toward the equator and it warms. Fold in the tilt of Earth's axis, its gentle wobbles, the Milankovitch cycles that modulate sunlight over tens of thousands of years, and you have a symphony of long rhythms that can paint glaciers or gardens across the same coordinates, given enough time and patience. The ocean slaps the hull, as if applauding the slowest band in the universe. You smile, it's the only concert where the encore takes 20,000 years. And then, a quirky notion skims the water like a flying fish. The old Earth crust displacement idea popularized in the 20th century by imaginative writers who proposed that the entire crust might occasionally slip over the mantle like a loose orange peel, hurling polar regions toward the tropics in a geological instant. It's a dramatic picture, the sort of thing that would definitely sell tickets. Tonight only, continents on ice skates, but it's not embraced by modern geophysics. Still, as a curiosity it lingers, a speculative postcard from a time when people wanted grand single-shot explanations for messy climate puzzles. Historians still argue whether enthusiasm for such theories reflects genuine evidence once misread, or the timeless human fondness for big answers that sound good at parties. You shift your weight, listening to the keel murmur. There's a middle ground, less flashy but sturdier underfoot. Polar wander and true polar wander, measured in degrees over long spans where Earth's mass distribution, giant upwellings in the mantle, heavy ice caps, deep subducted slabs, can nudge the whole shell to rebalance. The mainstream version is slow and calculable, not a dramatic midnight slide. You won't wake up to find penguins sunbathing under palm trees while asking where the sunscreen went. And if you do, you should also check what was in the ship's stew. Below the thought experiments lies evidence. Sediment cores drawn from seafloors that border Antarctica, ice cores drilled into the high domes, radar maps that pierce the ice to sketch mountain ranges and ancient riverbeds. Neutral narration takes the helm for a moment. Glaciology indicates Antarctica has hosted substantial ice sheets for millions of years, waxing and waning with orbital cycles, but persisting as a frozen continent through the span of human civilization. That's the ballast on which most scholars rest their case. You tap the rail, accepting that ballast matters, otherwise the ship of imagination lists and spills the cutlery. Yet the sea keeps offering questions. You think about maps with strangely confident curves along a remote southern coast, and about models that reconstruct shorelines at lower sea levels or with thinner ice near the margins during warmer interglacials. Could a narrow window have exposed rock enough for features to be recognized from offshore soundings? Might a sailor, skirting pack ice in an exceptional season, have traced a line of bays that later copyists smoothed into something tidier than reality? Historians still argue whether such scenarios account for the uncanny alignments people get excited about, or whether the fit appears only after the fact, a Rorschach drawn in ink in hindsight. The ship eases through a long swell. You watch the horizon breathe and imagine Earth doing the same, tilting a little, returning, ice sheets advancing like slow white tides, then retreating, sea levels rising, falling, rising again. Against that background, the human timeline shrinks to the length of a deck plank. It's humbling. It also makes you laugh softly at how we love to cram the planet's moods into the span of a lifetime. Posting Axis Update BRB every 41 years would not be a very successful social strategy. Somewhere aft, a sailor swears affectionately at a stubborn knot, reminding you that big ideas must tie to small realities. If there were periods when coastal shelves peeked out from the ice, they'd still be cruel places for wooden ships, drifting bergs, knife-cold fogs, currents that push like patient oxen. You picture an ancient navigator lodging a note in the margins of a chart. Possible harbor here. Also, the air bites. Practical details have a way of trimming legends like a barber with a steady hand. You tilt your head and consider magnetism. As volcanic rocks cool, they trap the direction of Earth's magnetic field, like little compasses frozen in lava. Strings of such rocks across the seafloor reveal stripes that mirror across mid-ocean ridges, one of the cleanest fingerprints of plate tectonics. No romance there, just physics and patience. But mixed in the conversation are sailors' tales about wandering compasses and whispers of magnetic mountains that pull needles astray. The fringe nickname for a certain cape might promise doom, yet the real culprit could be a local quirk in the field. You can't help a grin. Sometimes the dragon at the map's edge is just a cranky basalt outcrop telling your compass to chill. You let the two choirs sing at once, the disciplined chorus of data and the improvisational hum of speculation that keeps questions alive. If Antarctica has been ice-clad longer than history remembers, then mistakes, coincidences, and cartographic smoothing could explain any seductive match between old ink and new radar. If, conversely, there were rare moments when margins breathed free, then a diligent sailor might have sketched something truer than we expect, later polished by copyists until it shines a little too brightly. Between those possibilities lies a quiet channel where your mind drifts, content to admit that the planet's story is large enough to hold both caution and wonder. The wind freshens again, and the captain signals a small course change. You feel the hull accept it, the bow yawing a few degrees as if Earth herself had nudged you, saying, "Gently, now." You exhale, steady, and let the thought of moving ground settle in your bones. Continents don't hurry for anyone, but the human urge to understand moves quickly, tacking into every breeze it can find. You follow that urge, not toward a final answer, but toward the next soundings, the next core, the next page in a logbook that survived more storms than memory can hold. Somewhere ahead, the sea will offer another piece, not the whole picture, just a contour line, faint and honest, waiting to be traced. The days at sea dissolve into a blur of gray water and pale sky until, one morning, the horizon sharpens. You're not looking at icebergs or the white shoulders of distant glaciers. Instead, the captain points to a rolling swell and tells you the real prize lies beneath it. You lean over the rail, squinting at what seems like empty water, but in your mind, you dive below the surface, sinking into a world that remembers more than it shows. Far under the waves, the seafloor stretches out in dark plains and jagged ridges, the scars of Earth's restless crust. Mainstream marine geology tells you that these underwater landscapes are mapped using sonar, sound waves bouncing back to reveal the contours of mountains, valleys, and shelves hidden in the deep. Here, off the edge of Antarctica's continental shelf, scientists have traced lines that hint at ancient river channels, submerged deltas, and terraces that could once have been coastlines. The quirky detail? In 2017, a group of researchers published a study suggesting that some of these buried river systems might be millions of years old, formed before Antarctica froze completely. A few speculative voices go further, wondering aloud if parts of the coastline could have been ice-free during brief warm periods in human memory. Historians still argue whether that's a leap too far or a puzzle worth at least keeping on the desk. You imagine yourself in a small submersible, its lights cutting through the black water. The beam slides over sheer cliffs, past schools of ghostly fish, then across a flat expanse that looks uncannily like an ancient harbor floor. The instruments hum, recording depth and slope, while your breath fogs the inside of your helmet. Every rock face feels like it's trying to tell you something in a language of cracks and sediment layers. The neutral narrator in your head explains that sediment cores taken from around Antarctica's margins show layers of sand, silt, and microscopic fossils that change with the climate over eons. Warm water diatoms in certain layers speak of ice retreats, while others are choked with glacial debris. Each core is a vertical timeline, marking shifts between cold grip and gentle thaw. The ship rolls slightly as the winch hauls up a dripping metal tube from the water, a fresh core sample, its stripes of mud and silt as neat as a layered cake. A geologist cracks a smile, though she's quick to remind you that patience is the real tool here. Every centimeter of that core could hold thousands of years, and every grain needs its story coaxed out slowly. Science at sea isn't about dramatic eureka moments. It's about hours hunched over microscopes and days cross-checking dates. And yet, the romance persists. You picture an ancient sailor peering over the side of a wooden ship, unaware of the valleys and ridges beneath him, yet somehow drawing a coastline above that mirrors the shape of the bedrock below. Was it guesswork, smoothed by tradition, or an inherited scrap of knowledge passed from hand to hand? You can't help but let the idea hang there, buoyed between currents of skepticism and wonder. Somewhere out here, under thousands of tons of water, lies evidence older than any map, a record that doesn't care for human timelines, but keeps them tucked quietly in its deeper pages. The ship drifts, the waves slap softly at the hull, and you think about how the ocean hides things not out of malice, but out of habit. It's been doing it far longer than we've been drawing coastlines. The swells flatten under a pale sky, and you find yourself leaning against the rail, trying to fit all the fragments you've seen into one frame. The Piri Reis chart with its impossible coastline. The whispered voyages of sailors whose names never made it into the chronicles. Fossilized forests sealed under ice. Submerged riverbeds and terraces traced by sonar. Each piece is a shape in the puzzle, but when you try to click them together, the edges don't quite match. A fact anchors you. The mainstream consensus holds that Antarctica has been continuously covered by ice for at least the last 14 million years, with ice sheets advancing and retreating in rhythm with Earth's orbital cycles, but never fully melting in that time. That timeline would rule out the possibility of any human seeing it green, unless the definition of human, in this context, is stretched into something far older than Homo sapiens. The quirky countercurrent comes from a handful of fringe researchers who suggest that maps like Piri Reis's might depict coastlines observed during brief interglacials when the ice pulled far enough back to expose strips of rock. According to them, such moments could have been within the reach of maritime cultures with enough boldness and boat-building skill to risk the southern oceans. Historians still argue whether this is a plausible scenario or just an elegant way to keep a romantic theory alive. The scene around you shifts. You're no longer at sea, but in a candlelit room where a group of scholars from different centuries sits around a table. They don't see each other. Their times don't overlap, but they're here in your mind, each with a map spread before them. One points at a curving coastline, another shakes his head, another scribbles notes in a margin. The arguments are quiet, but firm, voices weaving like threads that never quite knot. You drift through their conversations, hearing the tug-of-war between precision and imagination. One insists on the primacy of empirical measurement, latitude from celestial fixes, longitude from laborious dead reckoning. Another leans on oral traditions, claiming they can hold accurate navigational detail for centuries if tied to ritual and song. A third, more skeptical, mutters that all coastlines look a bit alike when you squint. You step back, looking at the table from above. The maps overlap, edges fraying where time has chewed at them. Some coastlines align with uncanny neatness, others drift apart, like mismatched puzzle pieces forced together. It's easy to feel the pull of pattern recognition, to want the agreement to mean something profound. But it's equally easy to imagine that these alignments are the byproduct of selective eyes, modern interpreters tracing what they want to see. Back on deck, the wind has picked up again, bringing with it the low hiss of spray. You think about how the human mind loves stories with beginnings, middles, and endings, even when the truth is more like a spiral, ideas resurfacing, changing shape, reappearing in different guises centuries apart. The mystery of the ice-free Antarctica maps sits right in that spiral, spinning between fact, speculation, and the ever-shifting tide of what we consider possible. The ship's lanterns sway gently as night settles, and your mind drifts to the chart still tucked in the captain's quarters. Not just one or two, but a small gallery of old maps, each drawn by different hands in different centuries, yet all hinting, however faintly, at the same strange southern outline. You imagine them laid side by side, their coastlines overlapping like translucent layers, their inks bleeding into one another across time. A mainstream fact rises from the quiet. Historians know that early modern mapmakers often borrowed from one another. Once a coastline or landform appeared on one respected chart, it could ripple outward through copies and reinterpretations, even if the original was wrong. This cartographic inertia explains why some mythical places, like California as an island, persisted on maps for over a century after explorers had proven otherwise. But here's the quirky bit. In the case of Antarctica, some early maps show not just a vague southern landmass, but specific inlets, peninsulas, and bays that modern surveys have confirmed under the ice. The resemblance is rarely exact, but close enough to spark the question, how did these shapes appear in the first place? Historians still argue whether they're coincidences polished by artistic symmetry or genuine memories of coastlines observed in some lost chapter of exploration. You lean over one of the charts in your imagination, tracing the delicate ink lines. In the margins are the flourishes of a proud cartographer, ornate compass roses, windheads puffing their cheeks, and sea monsters with curling tails. They are works of art as much as tools of navigation. The coastline in question sits quietly among them, less dramatic than the monsters, but far more dangerous to your assumptions. The room fades, and you're standing in a Renaissance workshop. A cartographer dips his quill, glances at a sheaf of reference sketches, and transfers a curve from one parchment to another. He doesn't know that 5 centuries later, his copied line will be examined under digital overlays, scrutinized pixel by pixel. For him, it's just another day's work, one more inherited detail among many. Back on deck in the present, you can almost hear the rustle of those papers in the wind. The repetition of the shape across maps becomes its own kind of evidence, but whether it's evidence of truth or just the stubborn endurance of a good guess, you can't yet decide. Either way, the southern coast, ice-free in ink if not in reality, keeps turning up, like a guest who was never officially invited, but somehow always finds the party. The ship's timbers groan as you step into the captain's quarters, a cramped space filled with the scent of salt, leather, and lamp oil. Spread across the table is another map, not centuries old this time, but the kind made from the sweat and frost-bitten fingers of early explorers who actually set foot near the southern ice. You run your eyes over its hand-drawn coastlines, and you notice something. Even in the age of recorded voyages, the southernmost reaches remain mostly guesswork. Blank spaces gape like open mouths, daring someone to fill them. Mainstream history records those daring someones, the early modern explorers who braved the edges of the Antarctic Circle. Men like James Cook, who in 1773 crossed farther south than any recorded voyage before him, only to find an endless barricade of ice. His logbook notes the frustration of sailing for weeks without seeing land, just the shifting white wall. A fact, plain and solid. Cook never claimed to see the continent itself, only the ice that guarded it. But here's the quirky contrast. Scattered through the logs of sailors and whalers are strange reports of black ice cliffs, warm currents, and bare rock at latitudes where, by rights, there should have been nothing but frozen sea. These could be mistakes, mirages, or moments when weather briefly pulled back the curtain. Historians still argue whether such accounts are worth serious consideration or just the maritime equivalent of fish stories. You picture one such logbook entry being read aloud in a smoky tavern, the sailor embellishing with every round of ale. The crowd leans in as he swears there was green moss clinging to a rocky shore, and that the air was warmer there than any Antarctic wind had a right to be. His audience nods, half believing, half enjoying the story for its own sake. That's how myths and rumors hitch rides in human memory, not through meticulous record-keeping, but through the thrill of telling and retelling. The cabin fades, and you're standing on the icy deck of a 19th-century sealing ship. The rigging groans, sails crack like whips, and the cold stings your lungs with every breath. Ahead, through a break in the fog, you glimpse something dark, not ice, but rock, jagged and defiant against the white. It vanishes almost as soon as you see it, swallowed again by snow and distance. The captain squints, makes a note in his log, and sails on. Back in the present, you roll the idea around in your mind. If even a few of these sightings were real, they might explain how ancient-looking coastlines could sneak their way into later maps, passed down not through precise measurement, but through fragments, rumors, and the occasional lucky glimpse. Whether those fragments were enough to draw what Piri Reis saw, that's a question still rocking on the swell. The wind sharpens and swings from the south, carrying with it a chill that seeps through your coat. The captain's voice cuts through the cold, calling the crew to adjust course, not because of the weather, but to test the compasses. You follow the first mate to the helm, where the needle wavers slightly before settling, then drifts again, as though the invisible hand of the earth itself is tapping at it. A fact as solid as iron filings, Earth's magnetic field has long been both a gift and a puzzle for navigators. From the simple lodestone to the finely balanced mariner's compass, sailors have used magnetism to find their way for over 1,000 years. But the magnetic poles aren't fixed. They wander, sometimes subtly, sometimes alarmingly fast. In the age of wooden ships, this meant a navigator could sail with absolute confidence in the wrong direction. And here's the quirky angle. Some fringe theories propose that early mapmakers achieved uncanny accuracy by understanding the magnetic field in ways we've since forgotten, perhaps even predicting changes over time. A few have gone so far as to suggest ancient cultures tracked these shifts for centuries, building up data sets without ever calling them science. Historians still argue whether this is plausible foresight or simply a romantic reading of scattered records. You rest your hands on the rail, thinking about how magnetic variation might warp a coastline on paper. Too much correction in the wrong place, and bays bend strangely. Headlands point where they shouldn't, and an ice-clad continent can look eerily like a warmer, ice-free shore. It's easy to imagine how such distortions could align, accidentally, with what lies beneath today's ice. The scene shifts again. You're standing in a medieval workshop, a compass needle floating on a drop of water in a small bronze bowl. The mapmaker tilts his head, marking a bearing on a fresh chart, the quill scratching in steady arcs. He doesn't know that centuries later, someone will overlay his drawing with satellite imagery and gasp at the similarity. For him, it's just careful work, guided by a tool whose mysteries he takes for granted. Back on deck, the sun dips toward the horizon and the compass needle settles once more. You can't help but feel that, in the dance between magnetic truth and human interpretation, some coastlines may have taken on shapes that straddle the line between accuracy and illusion. And perhaps, in that in-between space, the seeds of the Antarctic mystery were sown. The sea is calm now, a wide mirror broken only by the ship's slow wake. You lean against the rail and feel the weight of everything gathered so far. Maps inked in candlelight, ancient voyages whispered in salt-stained logbooks, sonar scans tracing drowned valleys, magnetic needles drifting under invisible forces. Each clue is a bead, and tonight you're threading them into something that looks almost like a necklace. Almost. A solid fact keeps the thread from tangling. The Piri Reis Map is real. Dated to 1513, and contains coastal outlines that match known lands with surprising accuracy. The southern section does resemble part of Antarctica's coast, but modern scholarship tends to explain this as a distorted view of South America extended too far south, rather than proof of pre-ice exploration. It's the kind of grounded explanation that clears the fog, even if it leaves some travelers yearning for a more spectacular horizon. The quirky strand comes from map enthusiasts who have spent years layering ancient charts over modern projections, insisting that the match is too good to dismiss. Some even claim that the alignment is best when you account for ice-free topography, as revealed by 20th-century seismic surveys. Historians still argue whether this is an extraordinary coincidence or a faint echo of real ancient knowledge carried forward in ways we no longer recognize. You walk the deck, the boards creaking under your boots, and imagine each theory like an island chain. Some are solid underfoot, others are just mirages on the horizon. The temptation is to sail for the farthest one, the gleaming shape that promises answers no one else has. But you've also been at sea long enough to know that mirages vanish when you get too close. The night air smells faintly of resin from the rigging. You think about the stubborn endurance of certain mysteries, how they survive precisely because they sit at the edge of what's known, never quite tipping into proof or fiction. They remain a challenge, an invitation, a story retold because it refuses to stay still. Far ahead, the southern sky glows faintly with a band of cloud. You know what waits beyond it: the frozen coast, the white cliffs, the silence that swallows even the sound of your own breath. The final piece of the puzzle isn't about finding the answer. It's about holding the question without letting it slip overboard. And in that, perhaps the mystery is doing exactly what it was always meant to do. Dawn stretches thin along the southern horizon, a pale ribbon threaded through cloud, and you feel the ship ease toward stillness as if the ocean itself were exhaling. All night you've been balancing possibilities like lanterns along a rail, careful science on one side, persuasive stories on the other. Now, as cold light unveils the water, you sense the narrative tightening, not toward a tidy verdict, but toward a steady place to stand. You cross the deck, palms brushing frost from the line. The captain nods without speaking. No fanfare follows, only the low thrum of timbers and the soft hiss of wake. You look south and let your eyes adjust. There is no green shore, no warm surf, no sudden unveiling of a lost harbor. There is the long, white patience of the world, spread wide as a closed book. If Antarctica keeps a diary, it writes in ice and seals the pages. A sober fact steps forward like a trusted helmsman: modern remote sensing, satellite altimetry, ice-penetrating radar, and seafloor sonar has mapped Antarctica's hidden bones, revealing mountain ranges, basins, and river systems long buried under kilometers of ice. Names like the Gamburtsev Mountains and the massive East Antarctic ice sheet are no longer rumors. They are contours and cross-sections, numbers and profiles, traced by instruments that ignore romance and measure what's there. It's not flashy, but it's the difference between a guess and a grounding. You rest your forearms on the rail and accept that grounding with a small smile. Answers this solid tend to wear sensible shoes. Even so, a quirky tidbit drifts by like a stray feather. A few fringe enthusiasts swear that certain Renaissance charts preserve echoes of survey data from a civilization so old it has no other fingerprint, an inheritance map passed down through libraries that later burned. It's a captivating image, ancient cartographers filing under "Don't lose this," very important, even if the evidence feels like smoke you can't quite catch. Wind slides across your cheeks, and the water wrinkles with fine, skittering lines. You think about how easily coastlines can be stretched by projection, smudged by magnetic error, polished by copyists, or conjured by wishful geometry until they resemble something they never were. You also think about luck. Sometimes a confident curve is just a confident curve. And sometimes, as every artist knows, you draw a bay because your elbow sneezed. Yet the pull of the riddle remains. You picture the old charts, not one, not two, but a chorus of them, humming a familiar shape at the bottom of the page. You could spend a lifetime adjusting overlays and still never be sure whether you found a harmony or a well-tuned coincidence. Historians still argue whether those southern lines represent a memory of real observation, a persistent cartographic tradition grown from error, or a mirror held up to our desire to find patterns where the paper is thin. The ship veers slightly, and you catch yourself grinning at the humility in that motion. Course corrections are a love language at sea. In the same way, intellectual humility keeps your story from capsizing. You can hold two things without tearing the canvas. First, that the ice here is old enough and thick enough to make human eyewitnesses to a green Antarctica exceedingly unlikely. Second, that humans are ingenious enough for their mistakes to look now and then like miracles. By mid-morning, the sun is a pale coin. A few birds flick past, scouts from a colder republic, looking as if they're running late for a meeting with the wind. You imagine a penguin in a tiny uniform checking passports on a floe, stamping visas with fish-shaped ink. If anyone knows the coastline, it's the residents. They never upload their maps, which is frankly rude but on brand. You breathe a laugh, and your breath ghosts away like a note you won't hear again. The crew moves with winter economy. Few words, sure hands, no wasted motion. Curiosity sharpens in quiet like this. You wonder how many mysteries survive because they live exactly where certainty thins, between the last instrument reading and the first sigh of hope. The Antarctic question belongs there, not buried, not solved, simply preserved at a temperature where it won't spoil. A final bead clicks on your mental abacus. Whatever a handful of antique coastlines may suggest, the stronger thread points to human craft, patient, cumulative, imperfect, and astonishing. People learned to turn stars into rulers, waves into hints, shadows into angles. They built tools that could err and traditions that could correct. If a southern line sometimes looks truer than it should, perhaps that is the shape of diligence casting a long shadow. You turn your face to the wind and let the cold tidy your thoughts. The sea has a talent for ending arguments by continuing to exist. No proclamation rolls across the sky. Instead, you choose a sailor's ending. You tie off what you can, leave a clean coil for what you can't, and trust the knots to hold until next season. Theories can be revisited, cores can be drilled again, maps can be read with calmer eyes, and the ice, whatever it hides, will keep. By afternoon, the light sharpens, and your ship makes its quiet pivot homeward. The bow writes a brief sentence on the water, and the water erases it at once. You accept the exchange, and feel its calm settle into your ribs. Some stories flourish not because they hand you a key, but because they teach you how to listen at the door. Evening leans down. The air tastes of snow, and the horizon turns the color of old pearl. You stand your last watch, and the world grows wonderfully simple. A deck beneath, a sky above, and a question riding along like a respectful passenger who knows when to stop talking. If the truth under the ice is ever meant to be known, it will arrive as many truths do, first as a rumor, then as a measurement, then as something so obvious we wonder how we ever missed it. Until then, the ice returns, immaculate as a sealed envelope, addressed to later centuries. You nod to the dark and tuck the mystery where it belongs, not solved, not shelved, but safely stowed for the next clear night. The ship quiets to a hush, and you let your shoulders sink, softening into the slow rhythm beneath your feet. The water moves in long, even breaths, and the air carries that clean, cold scent that makes thoughts behave, each one arriving, bowing, and stepping aside. You followed maps through candlelit rooms, watched needles tremble, and listened for old coastlines in the whisper of paper. And now all of it drifts outward, like lights on a far shore sliding behind a gentle fog. You breathe a little deeper, a little slower. Your hands grow warm inside your sleeves. The rigging sighs, and that sound becomes your metronome, steady, unhurried, content to be exactly what it is. The horizon is a calm line, the sky a soft wash, and the question you've carried all night loosens its grip, becoming lighter, rounder, almost friendly. You don't need to turn it over anymore. It turns itself, like a slow star wheeling through quiet dark. Imagine the deck beneath you as a wide, safe cradle, moving just enough to remind you that the world is steady even when it flows. Imagine the ice far to the south as a great white library, shelves closed for the evening, keeping its pages in order until morning. There is time for answers, and there is time for rest. And tonight, the second is wiser than the first. Let your eyelids lower. Let your breath lengthen. The cold becomes a clarity, and the clarity becomes peace. Somewhere ahead, questions wait patiently. But not here. Not now. Here, there is only the low hum of the world doing its work, and the easy way your body knows how to drift. The end, sweet dreams.